In August 1944, 18-year-old Günter Gräwe stood wounded in a field hospital near Normandy, France, after a grenade blast shattered the tank he served in. The raging Battle of Normandy claimed most of his comrades. Within days, American soldiers overran the field hospital and declared him a prisoner of war. This moment, which could have marked the darkest turn of his young life, became, in his own words, the luckiest day of my life. Gräwe's journey began aboard the ocean liner Queen Mary, escorting thousands of German POWs across the Atlantic to the United States. For many, this transport heralded fear and uncertainty. For him, aboard metal trays of meals, bunks with clean blankets, and a voyage seeing the ocean he'd never known. The difference was startling. When he arrived in the U.S., the typical expectation of horror was replaced by routine, order, and a fairness he did not anticipate. He was sent to the POW camp at Fort Lewis in Washington state. There,
Gräwe and thousands
of other German soldiers found a world unlike the one they had been taught to see. He recalled the moment of arrival, the wooden barracks, the snow-white sheets, the American soldiers who didn't call us nasty names. This did not mean the war's reality vanished. He remembered thinking of the communist threat, of Hitler's command, of duty ingrained since childhood. He had served in the Hitler Youth, volunteered for the German army, believed in what he had been taught. Yet within days of arrival, he stood behind barbed wire in a land where civilians waved and children smiled. The disorder of war contrasted against the calm order of the camp. Gräwe told of the camp commissary where, for the first time, he considered whether to buy an ice cream or a bottle of Coca-Cola, something he had never imagined possible. The last ice cream I had in Germany was years ago. But Coca-Cola? Never before. His pay for work picking apples or harvesting potatoes in eastern Washington amounted to 80 cents a day, currency for purchases, a token of trust in a stranger's land. He reflected, I suddenly realized how extremely lucky I had been to be captured by the American army and not the Russian one. In Germany, back home in Lüdenscheid, a small industrial town, food was rationed, options scarce, and loyalty to Hitler unquestioned. Germany's youth programs, the Deutsche Jungvolk and Hitler Youth, marked his childhood. But here in America, Gräwe discovered the unexpected: treatment, dignity, choices. Over time, this would form a subtle but powerful shift in his worldview. What began as captivity evolved into something else, a confronting mirror of propaganda versus reality. The world he entered was not one of chains and humiliation, but one of routine human decency. The story of how a young German soldier discovered America behind barbed wire is not about heroism in battle. It is about the shock of perception and the beginning of a transformation. For most German prisoners, the first weeks in America were filled with confusion. They expected beatings, starvation, humiliation, everything Nazi propaganda had promised them about the barbaric Americans, but what they found inside the camps was discipline mixed with fairness. At Fort Lewis, guards enforced strict rules, yet they treated the prisoners with an almost shocking level of respect. The Americans didn't shout or hit. They demanded work but gave rations that many Germans described as better than home. Every morning began with roll call, breakfast, and then assignments, some to work farms, others to repair roads, load supplies, or clean barracks. Günter Gräwe recalled seeing American farmers smile and wave at him as he picked apples under the warm Washington sun. These were supposed to be his enemies. Yet they spoke kindly, offered water, and even joked through gestures when language failed. It was a silent education, one that quietly dismantled years of indoctrination. The camp itself was organized like a small town. There were classrooms, a theater, a library, and even a choir. The Red Cross delivered letters from home and monitored camp conditions. Many prisoners took English lessons. Others painted, played soccer, or built furniture. At night, laughter and songs could be heard echoing from the barracks, a strange sound of life in captivity. Gräwe began to notice subtle changes within himself. The anger and pride he once carried as a loyal German soldier began to fade. He started to question what he had believed about America, about the war, even about Hitler himself. One day he overheard a guard say that in America, the president could be criticized openly without fear. That was when I realized how different this country truly was, he later said. The food was plentiful, and the work, though tiring, brought a sense of routine. He remembered the first time he was paid and allowed to buy something with American money. The idea that a captured soldier could earn wages was unthinkable in Germany. Yet here it was normal. Some POWs used their pay to buy stationery and write home. Others saved it for souvenirs, a pen, a postcard, a memory of an unexpected kindness. But there were still moments of tension. News from Europe trickled in, Allied bombings, the collapse of cities, the deaths of families. For many, guilt and grief were constant companions. They were safe while their loved ones suffered thousands of miles away. Gräwe described it as a comfort that hurt. Despite this, daily life continued with quiet order. Every evening, the prisoners watched the American flag being lowered. Some did so with silent respect, others with bitterness. But over time, more and more of them began to feel something else. A reluctant admiration for the nation that treated even its enemies with decency. Behind the barbed wire, an invisible transformation was taking place. The prisoners had been captured by force. But what was changing them now was not power. It was freedom, glimpsed from inside a fence. By 1945, the war in Europe was collapsing. German POW camps across America held nearly 500,000 soldiers. Behind the fences, a quiet revolution was taking place. Not of weapons, but of minds. For years, Nazi propaganda had painted America as a land of chaos, ruled by Jews, controlled by money, filled with crime and racial disorder. Soldiers like Günter Gräwe had grown up believing that Americans were cruel, undisciplined and morally broken. But day after day, what he saw in the camp contradicted everything. He watched American guards share cigarettes with prisoners. He saw black and white soldiers working side by side. He noticed that discipline came not from fear, but from a sense of fairness. Even the smallest acts, a smile, a handshake, a shared joke, began to erode the lies he had been raised on. One afternoon, the camp commander gathered the prisoners for a meeting. The Americans showed them film reels, news footage of destroyed German cities and Allied victories. For many, it was the first glimpse of the real war beyond Nazi censorship. Some refused to believe it. Others broke down in silence. It was like waking from a long sleep, Gräwe remembered. As weeks turned into months, discussions inside the barracks grew deeper. Some men still clung to their loyalty to Hitler, calling him the last hope of Germany. Others, including Gräwe, started to question everything. The invasion of Poland, the atrocities whispered about in the East, the purpose of the war itself. American officers encouraged reading. Books about democracy, philosophy, and history circulated among the prisoners. The Red Cross delivered newspapers. For the first time, men who had once sworn obedience without question began to think critically. Gräwe found himself fascinated by the idea that a nation could be powerful without dictatorship. In Germany, he later said, we believe strength came from obedience. In America, it came from trust. That simple realization marked a turning point. Meanwhile, life outside the fence was changing too. Local Americans who had once feared the Nazi prisoners began to see them differently. Farmers praised their work ethic. Children waved to them from dirt roads. Churches organized visits to bring books and treats at Christmas. A quiet friendship began to replace suspicion. For Gräwe, the transformation was complete when a young American soldier, barely older than him, handed him a small photograph of his family. They're waiting for me, the soldier said. You'll see yours again too. That moment of humanity, between two enemies, broke the last remnants of hate within him. The war that had started with bombs and slogans was ending here, with small acts of kindness that no bullet could erase. Behind barbed wire, in the heart of America, an army of prisoners began to rebuild their sense of what it meant to be human. In the summer of 1946, long after the guns of Europe had fallen silent, the prisoners began to go home. For Günter Gräwe, leaving America was not a triumphant return. It was a journey back to a country he no longer recognized. The war was over, Hitler was dead, and Germany lay in ruins. At Fort Lewis, the Americans gathered the men for transport. Before departure, they were given clean uniforms, food rations, and a final medical check. Gräwe remembered shaking the hands of the guards, who had once watched him through rifles. They treated us like men, he said. That is something I will never forget. The voyage across the Atlantic felt different from the first. 3 years earlier, he had crossed the ocean as a defeated soldier, fearing torture and humiliation. Now he crossed as a man changed, grateful, confused, and uncertain of the future. When the ship docked in Europe, He saw cities reduced to rubble, people scavenging for food, and children who had never known peace. In Germany, many former POWs faced suspicion. Some called them soft for speaking kindly about America. But Gräwe and others carried memories that no accusation could erase. Memories of decency, fairness, and quiet respect. It was in captivity, he later said, that I first learned what freedom truly means. He returned to his hometown of Ludenscheid and found little left of the world he had known. His house was damaged, his friends scattered, his youth stolen by war. Yet he also carried something precious, a new perspective. The idea that enemies could become teachers, that kindness could be stronger than propaganda. For years, Gräwe kept a photograph of Fort Lewis in his drawer. Decades later, he returned to America, not as a prisoner, but as a guest. He stood before the base's flag once again, older, slower, but smiling. He thanked the officers, who welcomed him back and said, the words that summed up a lifetime of reflection. I came here as an enemy, but I left as a friend. His story mirrors that of thousands of other German POWs who were held in the United States. Many wrote letters of gratitude. Some even emigrated back to America after the war. Others helped rebuild democratic Germany, inspired by what they had seen behind the barbed wire, that respect and freedom could coexist. The story of Günter Gräwe is not just a tale of capture and release. It is the story of how humanity can survive even in the most unlikely places, in the heart of a war that divided the world. One young soldier discovered that compassion could be stronger than hatred, and that sometimes captivity can set a man free.